Hello everybody and welcome to the first installment of our new webinar series that is called All About Our Product and Their Uses, that is put on behalf of the community of practice on ontology of the CGIAR Big Data Platform for Agriculture. Over the coming year, via this new webinar series, we will explore the products that have been developed by the community of practice on ontologies. The first webinar of this new series is about the crop ontology and its uses by the breeding database. To guide us on the topic today, we'll have three panelists, and I would like to thank them in advance for the time they have spent to prepare these webinars. I will now hand it over to Elisabeth Arnaud. That is the Crop Ontology Project Investigator. She is also the Ontology COP leader, and she is working at the Alliance Bioversity International-CIAT.
Thank you, Céline, for the introduction. So I will be presenting the crop ontology. I hope you hear me well. So the crop ontology is a very long-lasting tool. In fact, it started in 2008, and I wanted to introduce the list, or at least some of our talented curators, because each of them, they take care of one or two or three crops, and they help us keeping the crop ontology at a high quality level of content, I would say. And they help also scientists to share their variables and traits with us. So they are very important go-between between the scientist and the crop ontology and the breeding systems. And I would like also to highlight the role of Marie-Angélique Laporte, who is working for Bioversity CIAT Alliance, and she is the global curator of the crop ontology, providing technical support to all the crops which are online. Also, Julian Petraglia, who is the curator of the breeding management system, who is also sharing with us all the traits, dictionary of traits he develops for the BMS. And Laurel Cooper, who is the curator of the plant and the trait ontology for the Planteome project, which is one of our key collaborators. Okay, so as you know, the most important is to make sense of the data that are captured during the multi-location variety evaluation for any crops. And the main issue is that data are not collected in a consistent manner across the sites, but also now there is a multiplication of devices, digital tools helping to collect more and more data. So what we need is to make sure that data collected in the field about the trait or the phenotype of a plant is properly stored, published, and used for modeling or meta-analysis. So at least we can produce some information and knowledge that can be shared with farmers. Of course, we need to avoid the confusion between what we call a trait and what we call a variable, which was quite confused in the past. There was no naming convention of a variable and methods. And with the arrival of digital tools, of course, there is a greater need of an agreed terminology that clearly defines each information item that are captured and exchanged along the data management cycle. And of course, the consistency of the data description must last across the data management cycle, of course. Due to this situation, in 2008, we developed the crop ontology to provide defined traits, parameters, and their standard nomenclature for variables for being used by breeding field books and databases, improving the data annotation of breeding data. So to date, we have 31 species available online, more than 4,000 traits, and more than 6,000 variables online. And because we have a 12-year experience, we develop good practice by publishing a website with a given format, accompanied by guidelines, and of course, a workflow for developing trait dictionaries up to producing a formatted file and uploading them in the database. A data annotation must explain for those data files what is the observation about. So what is the trait? And we are used to call it entity and attribute, which means the entity can be the plant, can be the grain, can be the leaf, and the attribute will be the character observed, color, age, area. So here you have an example of a breeder file with several traits that are measured, grain yield, grain color, and plant age. And the annotation must also contain the method used for observing the trait. So it can be a simple measurement, but can be an estimation or a computation. And of course, it has to be completed by the indication of the scale used, categorical scale and classes, and the unit. So all this information will make the data and the data value more exchangeable and reusable. So if a database that can, or a platform that can produce fieldbook or lab book is combined with the crop ontology, then you will have the access to formatted traits, entity and quality, but also to a series of variables that combine the traits, the method, and the unit of the scale. And a trait can be described by several variables according to the method you use. And as long as the breeding, the fieldbook design system is linked to the crop ontology, you can produce electronic fieldbooks that will produce those files with proper formatting of the variables, and it's uploadable into the breeding management systems like BMS or Breedbases. So we provide a trait dictionary template of the crop ontology. You can download it from our website, and it helps and guides scientists along with the ontology curator and data manager to develop proper trait dictionaries. So you can describe your variable, you can describe the trait following the proposed type of information, the method, the scale, and the unit. And of course, to do that, you have to get some help from the guidelines. And once the trait dictionary is developed, it's uploadable on our website online. So here you have an example all of the trait classes we have available for all the 31 species online. So traits are classified across those trait classes, we call them. They are all method, traits, and variables and scales are all defined as much as possible with a reference. And we propose a classification of method and a classification of scales. So you can always be guided to describe your variable at best. And then once your trait dictionary is done, it's uploaded on our website. So you see here you have the classes, a morphological trait about root lengths taken through image analysis. So you have the traits, you have the method, and you have the unit in centimeter. And here you have a clear description of how the image was produced using a specific scanner. And you also have the reference to the published paper about that methodology. And this makes the crop ontology more reliable and trustable. Each time there are relevant references added and clear definitions that are agreed across the community. And you see that for rice, it's also the result of a collaboration between several centers and partners. So in 2019, we reached the number of 31 species thanks to the addition of new crops. They are highlighted in orange. And by the updating of new traits for the ontologies highlighted in blue. And I wanted just to show that, to show also the contribution of partners. So this is not only a CGIAR effort, it's really a project, a collaborative project from the community, and many partners are contributing traits. Then we have a long-lasting collaboration of the project and platform called Planteome. This was supported by NSF and in collaboration with Oregon State University, Pankaj Lab. And particularly the work has been to map the crop ontology, crop-specific traits to the neutral species trait ontology. The idea was that if we keep our ontology crop-based, which is the entry point for breeders, we are not solving or we are creating a semantic split between crops. And sometimes when you want to do a comparison between crops, then you need to have a way to look for one trait and be able to recover the information, whatever crop you're looking at. So it's very useful for comparative genomics, and Laurel Cooper has already published a paper on that in now. So 10 crops have been already mapped between crop ontology and trait ontology. And then I just want to say that our ontology is also connected to standards like MyAPI, Minimum Information for Plant Phenotype Experiment, and BRAPI, which is the breeding API. It's a community-based API that enables exchange of breeding data between databases, and then crop ontology is one of the standards. We also have a curation workflow, and this workflow is still being developed. It has started with the research program for root tubers and banana, but we are looking at making it more global, including more crops. But the idea is that using GitHub, you can upload your ontologies, trait dictionary in several formats, and it will be curated by curators. Each time somebody wants to submit a variable using the submission form, it will create an issue. And then the creators will be aware and they can accept or discuss with you your submission. And this is very much linked at the moment to the breed basis Lukas will talk about. So what is in progress for the coming year? We are discussing with food labs and they are using NIRS techniques. So we are adding in our guidelines new techniques, new methods of measurement. And for now, we have added the prediction that enables to describe a variable issued from models or prediction. So we discussed that with a group of scientists, and this was the best way of describing, for example, a spectrum coming from near infrared spectral analysis. We are also working on adding better the farmer preferences into the crop ontology. So extracting from the surveys done with farmer where we have a lot of text, the definition of the qualities that a farmer prefer for a variety, and insert that into the crop ontology so a breeder can easily understand what the farmer means when he expresses his quality and can translate it into a breeding trait. So this is done in the context of developing breeding product profiles with the platform called Experts in Breeding. And then the last track we are following is adding sensory traits. More and more breeders want to understand what makes a variety acceptable and adopted in region. And of course, the processed product or the raw products that is consumed is very important to understand what the consumers and processors will expect from a variety. So we have now a list of a series of lexicon, which are very defined attributes for a trained sensory panel, and we would like to insert those into the ontology. And doing this way, we hope that breeders can always access some complementary information when they want to define their breeding product and the targeted region and the targeted community or market segment. Okay, so this is just the landscape of all our key collaborators and users. So I won't go through, but you see it's a mixture of information systems, annotation tools, public research institutes, universities, and the industry. So it's, I think, a resource that was necessary and was missing. So the adoption is quite large. So if you want to get involved, of course you can. So we suggest that you check what are the ontology already available that you can use. If you want, you can download the trait dictionary template. If you have a new trait dictionary to develop from scratch, But if you have only few variables to add on given crops, you can just create a GitHub account and go on the Planteome GitHub and start to exchange with the curators who are working on this repository. And also you start annotating your data with the variables and their unique identifier. And I would like just to stress that some scientists in CIAT are now using the identifier of their variables for publication, for peer-reviewed papers, so they can put in supplementary data the information about the variable, that it has been published in Crop Ontology, it has a definition, and it's properly described. So I think it's a good move to help also with the quality of the description of your data. And then, of course, if you want to contact us, we have an help desk mail address. And behind this mail address, it's Marie-Angélique replying, and myself as well. So thank you for your attention. I hope I went through the full picture of the crop ontology. If you have questions, type it in the chat, and as Céline said, and we can look at it after. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. So now we'll have Corina de Luna Habito. She is a regional deployment manager at the Integrated Breeding Platform, and she will talk about the application of the crop ontology that Elizabeth just presented in the breeding management system.
Thank you, Céline. Hello, everybody. Before I dive into the details of how we use crop ontologies in the breeding management system, I will tell you a little bit more about the integrated breeding platform. Just some background information about who we are and what we do. So, like the Crop Ontology initiative, the Integrated Breeding Platform, or the IBP, was a project that was created by the CGIAR Generation Challenge Program. So the GCP was created in 2003, and it was conceived as a time-bound 10-year initiative with a mission of using genetic diversity and advanced crop science to improve crops for greater food security in the developing world. So from 2014 to 2008, the work of the GCP covered 21 CGIAR mandate crops. It's also during this period that the GCP initiated the development of crop-specific trait dictionaries destined for breeders' field books. So in 2018, we started the Crop Ontology project. They started the development of dictionaries for chickpea, maize, musa, potato, rice, and wheat. Now the integrated breeding platform has evolved. After the GCP closed in 2014, the IBP continued on as an independent nonprofit initiative that is registered in the US. The integrated breeding platform is, since 2014, has been hosted at CIMIT, and we are still hosted at CIMIT as of today. And so the BMS, or what we call the breeding management system, is a software suite, and it's actually our core product at the IBP. Okay, so the BMS is actually our core product, but it's just part of what we offer. We also offer IT and plant breeding expertise and many community resources like a catalog of trait-linked markers, publications, communities of practice. These are all accessible on our website. Currently, the IBP, we operate on a dual funding model. That is, in other words, we receive public and donor funds, as well as income from paying users. So this enables us to support implementation of the BMS at no cost for the partners that we subsidize. So during the IBP project phase 1, which was generously supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, our work was more focused and concentrated on improving 9 crops for drought tolerance. So from 21, we reduced the number of crops to 9, and so we now had 9 mandate crops. So it's bean, cassava, chickpea, cowpea, groundnut, maize, rice, sorghum, and wheat. And during this phase 1, our focus is on the development and deployment of a single user information system, which we now call the BMS standard. So this was the free to download single user information system. Okay, so during the IBP phase 2, we shifted toward developing and deploying a centralized multi-user system with support services and proprietary functionality. And this information system terms for several crops. So this our strategy was to deploy BMS not for individual scientists but for institutional use. Another notable achievement during this phase 2 was the rollout of the Trait Dictionary Template version 5 in 2015 and the first version of the guidelines on how to create a new ontology. Okay, so here I will be illustrating the practical application of crop ontologies in the BMS in 7 steps. This is just really to demonstrate the role that crop ontologies play, the important role that they play in facilitating data access, discovery, and comparability. So step 1, trait dictionary curation. So this is how we, this is our workflow of how we apply, how we introduce the crop ontology into the BMS. So it's either one of 2 events happen. So either we download a trait dictionary that already exists for some crops from the cropontology.org, or we develop our own with clients and partners for the crops for which we don't have a trait dictionary yet. We usually develop these trait dictionaries in consultation with the scientists who are working for an institution. The trait dictionary curation is usually done by my colleague Julian Pietragala. So he's our resident ontology specialist, and he's based in Mexico. So either we download a trait dictionary or we develop our own. Of course, we are guided by the guidelines for creating a new crop ontology. So the next step is, once we have our trait dictionary ready with our variables defined, we now load them into the BMS database. We really like using the trait dictionary template because it's very easy to use. You don't need to know how to use GitHub or any very highly technical manipulation. The scientists that we work with, they really appreciate that the template is very easy, very easy to use, and we just offer them guidance on how they would name their traits, their scales and methods, and their variables. Within the IBP, we've developed a tool that allows us to load an entire trait dictionary in a matter of less than a minute. We have developed this tool for use by the IBP deployment team. This tool is very well documented. So this has been shared. I've shared this with my colleagues all over the globe, so who are also database specialists like myself. So they are able to use this tool for loading any new trait dictionaries that they need to have in the BMS for especially for new deployments. And so here in the BMS, we have an ontology manager, which we have we have a tab for variables, a tab for properties or scales, properties or traits, and also we have also for methods and scales. Okay, then step 3 entails creating a BMS study with variables, with your variables of interest. Okay, so here we have our study manager tool. And in this study, this specific variable for amylose content, measured using NIRS in units percentage. So this has been added to my study. And you may notice that at the bottom we have here a crop ontology ID. So this is the CO identifier, of the variable. So in the BMS, we are storing the CO ID of the variable and the trait. And so within the BMS, you can, if you want to have more information about this variable, actually the CO ID presented here, it's clickable and it redirects you to the Crop Ontology website. So where you can see more details about the variable that was used in your study. So this is a database for rice. Okay, and then 4th step, once you've set up your study in the BMS, you now can export your field book into a number of formats. So you can export it into an Excel format like what we see here, where we have 2 sheets. So we have the description sheet and the observation sheet. So in the BMS, we are now including the crop ontology ID in the description sheet of any field book that's generated from the BMS. Okay, so another format would be files that you can feed into the Kansas State University field book. So it's the Android app for data capture. So on the left, it's the observation sheet of an Excel field book, and on the right we have a sample screenshot of the field book, the KSU field book interface for doing your data collection. Okay, step number 6. After collecting your data, you just simply need to import back your files where you have put in your data, and then finally, once you've saved your data, you now have the capability of comparing data across studies, seasons, teams, and we offer a number of query tools in the BMS, and we are part of the BRAPI community. We can also plug in existing BRAPs already, like the BRAPI filtering, graphical filtering tool that you can see here. In the BMS, it's really an essential key of our deployment because it allows us to deploy and to promote best practice in research data management, because we need these harmonized description of data that can only be provided by the crop ontologies. With the application of crop ontology principles, the use of the trait dictionaries, it enables us to rapidly deploy the BMS beyond the GCP's 9 mandate crops. So at the moment, we now have more than 40 crops or species, and this is growing very rapidly. We have also been able to deploy databases with ontology terms in Portuguese. For example, for our cotton and bean databases for Embrapa in Brazil. And I've also been able to build ontology databases in French for a private seed company. The crop ontology principles are really extensible. It's not just limited to breeding. It even enables us to annotate, for example, characterization data of genetic resources, So 2 weeks ago, I just loaded some characterization descriptors for coconut genetic resources. And so where are we today? Currently, the BMS has been deployed at 40 organizations worldwide. So these are organizations of different sizes, shapes and sizes. Out of the 40, 60% are in Africa. And out of the 45 are CGIAR centers, namely ICRISAT, Africa Rice, IITA, CIAT, and ICARDA. I would like to thank my colleague Julian Petragala, because I want to give him due recognition for all the hard work he's put into curating all of our trait dictionaries that we needed. I know that it's really a lot of work, and so I had to thank him for his hard work and dedication. And I also want to thank all of the contributing scientists in the crop ontology communities of practice, because without you, we wouldn't have any content in our crop ontology. So thank you. And I'd like to thank our hosts and hubs, our dev partners, notably the Excellence in Breeding platform, and of course the Crop Ontology project. Thank you to our facilitators. And again, I need to mention the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for having supported us for several years until 2019. So thank you for your attention. So if you want to get involved, because at IBP we believe that partnerships are the key to our success. So if you want to explore how you can engage with us, please contact us, our director, Jean-Marcel Ribot, and to see how we can align our approach with your priorities. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Corina. And now we'll have Lukas Mueller, that is professor at Boyce Thompson Institute for Plant Research, and he will talk about leveraging crop ontologies in Breedbase.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity here to present Breedbase and how we work with crop ontology. And I just want to say, to start with, Breedbase and BMS are good tools to manage your data, but I think the key really often I find is the ontology. The technical solution is in a way something that's available. You can use Breedbase, you can use BMS, but when you start with a new crop, really the limiting factor is often the crop ontology. The ontology that you're using to describe your crop. And the issue is that that's more of a social problem. People have to agree on naming things and so on, and agree on methods. And that's actually, that we have the crop ontology represents a huge amount of work that is just amazing, and without which we couldn't do anything. So I think I just want to say that from the start, that the technical solutions are often not the problem, but the ontologies that you use or would like to use or would like to create are really limiting. And so having the crop ontology is just a huge gain for the system. Not sure how I can advance here, actually, my slides. Oh, there we go. I just wanted to briefly mention that we are at the Boyce Thompson Institute in Ithaca, New York. We are on the Cornell campus, but we are an independent plant research institute. And so we are affiliated with Cornell, but we are not part of Cornell. We're an institute with about 15 labs, and we do a lot of fundamental plant research and plant defense, plant fruit ripening, plant insect interactions, and so forth. So the Breedbase saga really starts with a database called SGN. This is the Solanaceae Genomics Network that we started in 2003 with Stephen Tanksley, Professor Stephen Tanksley at Cornell. And we have developed that over the years. And so a few years ago, we actually created another instance of SGN for a project that was called, that is still called Next Gen Cassava Project. And was to be a breeding database for cassava, and that worked very well. And so we cloned it more, and we created other databases such as for sweet potato, for banana, and for yam. And we also had, some other databases such as citrus screening that are very specific in their application to a disease of citrus. And so SGen was more a genomics database, but early on we started to implement a lot of phenotyping methods and images into the database, so that we could really get a handle on this genotype to phenotype link. We wanted to create tools such as QTL tools and GWAS tools and so on. And of course, all this then can be easily applied to breeding data. And you see that it's all web-based. You can run local instances if you want, but you can also just use it as a kind of a cloud-based tool. There are currently maybe a few dozen, let's say, organizations and labs who use Breedbase beyond this. So these 4 databases that I just mentioned, they're also sometimes referred to as the RTB breeding databases or RTB bases, and they are all funded through projects by the Gates Foundation, and have their breeding projects that are mostly managed in Africa, and some of them are managed by IITA, some of them are managed by Cornell, and so forth. So it got very confusing because we always referred to this system as cassava base, and so we had to find another name for it, because obviously you can put other data than cassava data into this system, as we show here. There's lots of different crops it is used for. So we came up with the name Breedbase and designed this nice logo. And so if you want to know more about Breedbase, you can go to, there's also a website called breedbase.org, and you can contact us there if you're interested in knowing more about Breedbase. So what does the goal of Breedbase, what does it do? I mean, the central goal of Breedbase is to create a digital ecosystem. And what that means is that all the data is captured in an electronic format and is processed in an electronic format, and is analyzed, and in the end gives you suggestions on what parents you should use for your next breeding cycle. And so this circle here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this circle here represents the breeding cycle. This guy represents the breeder, and you always interact with the database. And what you're doing is you're round tripping to the database. So the database will assign identifiers for all your objects, for example. Then you can plant your fields, and you can do your field evaluation. And as with BMS, as we saw before, we also use the same fieldbook application mostly to collect data. People like this app, and it's very popular. It's created by Jesse Poland's lab at Kansas State University. And it's kind of a standard now to use for collecting breeding data. But then you go on in the breeding cycle, and you can do your analysis and make selections and so on, and then you can perform the crosses. And again, for crossing, we use an app that's also created by Jesse Poland's lab called Intercross. And we have other apps too, such as PTract for banana, which is a very complex crossing scheme, and other issues there. Banana is always a little bit more complex than anything else. So, but I think the important thing here is the database is basically a central thing that you always update and always tracks all your breeding materials at any time. So there's nobody should maintain Excel sheets on the side with lists of stuff. Everything is in the database. So for example, it also supports the management of lists and so on. So you need to do that outside of the database. So how is it implemented? We are using a relational database called Postgres to manage all the data. It's schema is based on the Chado schema, which we used already for SGN, which was developed initially by Flybase. And we have worked a lot to integrate breeding data into Chado, and we came up with this Chado ND schema, and we worked a lot with other labs on that, so that a lot of people will use it. And one, one of the leading labs that was collaborating, we were collaborating with Historian Main's lab in Washington State, and with other people, and so we came up with this Chado natural diversity or Chado ND schema that we use to store all the diversity data, phenotypic data and genotypic data. We had a long history, obviously, with SGN of creating databases, and I think you can see here in these couple of papers how the transition went from a genomics database to a breeding database. Very early, we started creating community-based databases for genomics databases where researchers had their data in the database under their control. And they could, for example, put in an annotation for a gene and so on. And of course, that's very similar to how we run the database right now, where the breeder is always in control of their data. So they can upload and manage their data in the database. And here is just a paper from, I don't know, a few years ago, where we talk about how the Soul Genomics website moves from genotype to phenotype to breeding. And we're actually publishing soon a paper about Breedbase as well. So the Chado schema itself is actually what I would describe as a ontology-based database schema. It uses ontologies to describe the data that's in the database, but it also internally uses a lot of ontologies. So I think we have about 60 different ontologies in the database that are sometimes very small. They maybe describe certain data items in certain tables and so on. And so ontologies are just a natural in Chado and Chado ND databases. So we expose some of the ontologies in the database to the user, and you can see here our ontology browser, which I have to say doesn't look as nice as the BMS one that we just saw. But you can see these are all the main ontologies that are in there. Then you can dig in and you can go hierarchically and discover all the different ontologies. You see that we are definitely having a genomics background. We have all the gene ontology ontologies in there. We have plant ontology and sequence ontology. And here, this is an example from Cassava Base. You have the Cassava Base crop ontology, and you could now dig in and you could click here and see all the detail pages. You could see how many experiments have been done with the different ontology terms and so on. So it's very tightly integrated. And so I think these points have been made before. Why do you actually need an ontology? You could just make up terms as you go, but that's of course counter the idea of a central database where you have data maybe that comes from different programs and different years and different locations. You want to really be able to compare these data, to analyze these data, to look at location-dependent performances and so on. And so you really need to standardize your traits and then create variables that describe your analytical methods and also the scales that you're using so that everything is consistent and comparable. So crop ontologies are essentially what I would call a pre-composed ontology. So you basically describe your trait, and then your variable describes the method and the scale. And that is, of course, great because standardization, as we just seen, is good, but sometimes it lacks a little bit of flexibility. And sometimes you have experimental approaches that need to describe more complex metadata, such as sampling procedures and so on. And yes, that could be in the method, but certain experimental setups have so many different variations that you would have to create tens of thousands of terms as pre-composed terms. So what we came up with, or I mean, this is not, we didn't come up with that, we just implemented it in the breedbases, is this idea of post-composing. And what you can do is you can take other ontologies and you can combine them with variables from the crop ontology. For example, you could have a sampling time ontology, you could have a tissue source ontology, or an ontology that refers to some way you prepared the sample. For example, we just heard about quality data, that's something big that crop ontology wants to describe, and it's really important. So you might have, you know, fried cassava versus cooked cassava and so on. And so that can be in the method, but I think a very flexible way of doing that is also post-composing that into the term. So how do you post-compose a term on a cassava base? So cassava base, or all the breed bases, have this menu bar, and you can access all these functionalities through these main menus here. And I don't want to give a whole kind of workshop about cassava base, but there is a menu entry called Compose a New Trait that you can choose, and you will go to the Compose a New Trait interface. And there you see your trait ontology. This is the trait ontology. This is what you're observing, and you can actually define this beforehand, what kind of ontologies are exposed here. So this has to be defined in some kind of configuration file for the site. And so here I could select a trait, then I could select what object I'm actually observing. So that defines kind of the tissue source, and then an attribute, and here it's how it has been processed. So I could select that, and so here I made a few selections. So I say dry matter content, that's a ontology variable. I say I'm working on fried roots, and I'm working on an axial root section. And then it creates a new term that combines these three terms, and then I can make annotations to that term. This is now a completely normal term that can be exported to a file, that can be exported to the field book, and so on. But it's a very flexible way of doing it. I could also add a time ontology term if I would sample this maybe after 1 month, after 2 months, and after 3 months after planting, maybe. Then I could add a time ontology term and create maybe 3 or 4 new terms with the time of sampling. Of course, sometimes you really do need a new trait and a new variable, or let's say a new trait, and you can actually request new traits using this interface. And I'm not sure if this is still the official interface, but this is an interface that we created together with the Crop Ontology, where you can go to this URL, submit.rdbbase.org, and you can give some information about yourself and then the traits that you would desire to have in the database. And of course, adding a trait is a touchy thing, because you don't want to have any duplicated traits in there. You don't want to have, you know, synonyms of traits. You don't have confusing traits. So what happens when you submit this form is it goes to a curator at Crop Ontology, and they will decide if the trait should be added, or maybe suggest modifications to the trait. So just briefly, I want to talk about the breedbase availability. It's actually available in open source, so you can just download it and use it. The source code is all available on GitHub. It's in the Soil Genomics account. But there is also a Docker that you can just download, and it should just run. So it takes 5 minutes to install, basically. But then you have to load all the ontologies and all your accessions and so on, and all these data management things are really the hard part. the software actually kind of, you know, as I said, Breedbase and BMS, for example, they solve a lot of the software problems that you will encounter. So they are kind of things that are available and you can use. But managing your ontologies and managing also the other part is managing your germplasm is a huge problem. They need to have nice naming and so on. So that is usually the bigger problem. But you can have the software in no time. So just click on this link and you will have a working instance of Breedbase in Docker. So just a couple of conclusions. Breedbase databases are extremely tightly integrated with the crop ontology, and it's a huge boon to the databases. The system of post-composing allows for more complex sampling and descriptions of the sample without having to create tens of thousands of pre-composed terms. And you can submit new variables through submit.rtbbase.org. This was a picture of my lab and some student interns from a couple of years ago. Actually, Prasad is a data manager from IITA, and I think I should also thank a few other. I mean, there's too numerous to list all, but I think I should definitely mention Fola Abgona, who was mentioned on the previous slide as well, who has been an excellent person to manage the ontologies and all the annotations. And of course, I should also mention for the cassava project all the breeders that have been very active in improving cassava base, such as Robert Kavuchi, Ismail Rabbi, and Chidosi Egesi, and many others, and also, of course, many of the yam breeders and sweet potato breeders have been key to improving the system, and the banana people. So I think that's what I have, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Lukas. Now it's time for the questions. So Vincent, if you are online, maybe you can ask your question to
yes, hello
Corina.
there. Thank you very
Hi,
much for a very detailed presentation. I noticed that in the list of crop species, coconut is not included, but you did mention that you've been working with coconut germplasm information, and I'm representing the International Coconut Genetic Resources Network, which is being currently transferred from Bioversity to the International Coconut Community, and we are going to be migrating the very old-fashioned coconut genetic resources database into a new system, probably linked to Grin Global. But we would be very interested to know more about how we can work more closely with the Crop Ontology project in the future. Thank you. Perhaps you could just give some general what you were doing and who you were working with. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm working with Chantal Amelang from CIAT.
Yes, fine. Yes, that's probably, we had a meeting on Monday. That's probably why she's looking at it now. Thank you. Yeah, good.
Yes, and so it was Chantal who had done the curation of the characterization variables, actually. So we are in the process of migrating a subset of the coconut genetic resources database. It's from the data from Cote d'Ivoire. And so yeah, so I worked with her, and I gave her some guidance on how to fill in the trait dictionary, and I used my tool to load that into a coconut database that is currently on the CIAR VMS.
Yeah. Yes, so we've been talking about the breeding management system as well as a tool to use. So thank you, that's useful to have the update, and I'll work with Chantal. Thank you. And of course, yourselves.
But I would be happy to organize a meeting with the coconut group, and we can show you what we've done in the BMS.
Yes, that would be interesting. So we'll hook up after the meeting, Corinne, as to when we might all meet sometime within the next couple of months.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chantal is from CIAT, huh?
Yes.
Montpellier. Okay, thank you, Corina. So we are back with the sound, so I can ask my question. In fact, my first question is for you, Corina. Have you have seen that the Breedbases, they have now a feature that enables users to submit variables and threads that goes directly to a GitHub where the crop ontology curators can see an issue and they can discuss and work on it. So my question is, when BMS will have such a feature that enables your users to at least share the variables they feel are the most relevant, those who are the most used by their program. Is it possible to plan that? Or?
Well, I will have to discuss with our development director, but yeah, there are other items that we need to work on in terms of prioritization. But we can start. We can discuss. We can start discussing on that.
Yeah, because I've been approached during the Plant and Animal Genomic Conference sometimes by scientists. They had only few threads and variables to submit, and they were asking if they had to fill in a thread dictionary for that, or if there was a direct online connection. So for now, the best is to fill in a thread dictionary for other crops than root tubers and bananas.
Yeah, so actually that's one of the challenges that we face as data managers of the IBP, because once we've loaded in a trait dictionary, at the current state, for example, I downloaded the rice trait dictionary today, and there could be a new variable tomorrow, and so it's unidirectional. There's because once the ontology database is installed, it will take on a life of its own. You can have more variables, but it will stay on that BMS. And so what would be, I think, a useful an exercise will be to have some sort of system to take metrics, what variables are commonly used in this BMS, and are there variables that need to be modified or corrected and adjusted and so on and so forth. So yeah, we've encountered this issue also as well with the sorghum group at CIAT. So so there's it becomes out of sync the moment that the trait dictionary is loaded. It's not automatically synchronized with what we have on the Crop Ontology website. So
it's perhaps a workflow to discuss within BMS. Yeah, all right. Okay, so this was my question.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Carlos was asking Corina, does the community version of the BMS Pro has the same feature of the Pro version?
Well, we can say the community license if you are fully or partially subsidized. But basically it's the same set of functionalities. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Corina. And so Carlos has another question for Lukas. When the BRAPI version 2 would be released, because we are planning the integration with ClimbMob.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are working on BRAPI 2.0. I hope it will be released in less than a month. So somebody's actively working on it and creating all the new. So there are quite a few changes between version 1.4, what was it, and 2. And I hope, in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we will have an implementation for the 2.0.
Okay, well, thank you, Lukas. So IITA GoToMeeting has a question for Lukas. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Oh, sorry, I'm Bosun Obile.
Hi, Bosun.
Yeah, thanks. The question is BRAPI version 2 that Lukas and his team is working on. I would like to know whether there's going to be a major change in it. That because we have integrated cassava base with our silicon, and we are already working at doing the same thing with yam base and musa base.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know whether we should be preparing for major change in what we have done. Thank you.
The good thing about BRAPI is that the old interface, I think we were up to 1.3, but I think the latest version was 1.4. But that version will stay on the site. It won't go away. So anything you have already working should continue to work. But then you can develop also code for new for the new version 2.0 calls, and they should work as well in parallel. That's a nice thing about these web interfaces. So version 1 and version 2 have a different URL. You know, the URL has a v1 in it for the version 1 and a v2 for the version 2. And so they can be up at the same time. And so old programs should still work with version 1. And I think that will be how it happens. Yeah. So everything should remain functional.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, still for Corina, because Lukas, in fact, we have been working closely for the root tubers and bananas, so I know a lot. It's just for, you mentioned 40 species, and we have 31 on our website, so there is probably a gap, and some are not probably common to BMS and Crop Ontology. So how shall we work on that to identify what is missing on our side?
We can
just to
discuss. Yeah, just to compare notes. We can compare notes.
Okay.
Okay, great. So we'll wrap up. So thank you very much to the presenter for taking the question and having this very clear presentation. This was the first webinar of the series all about our product that we will have this year to present the different product of the COP. In the next webinars of the series, we'll have the crop ontology, the agronomy ontology, socio-economy ontology, or even we'll talk about the Planteome ontologies. And this year, we'll also have another webinar series about how agriculture industry uses our products. So the first webinar of this series will be about the use of knowledge graph by biocrop science for enabling crop trial data exploration, and it will be in 2 months on the 9th March. It will be presented by Eric Antezana and Jens Hollander that are working at Biocrop Science. I hope you will join us for this webinar, and stay tuned on LinkedIn on our newsletter to have communication information on how to connect to these webinars. I would like to thank you all for attending these webinars, and now I will give the floor to Elizabeth for the last word.
Thank you, Céline. So first, I suppose you wanted to say that the knowledge graph webinar is in 2 weeks and not 2 months. But
okay. Yes, in 2 weeks.
Sorry, so put this in your agenda, because this is the first, I think, case we have seen of having a knowledge graph for field trial. First, on this webinar, I really want to thank Lukas, Mueller, and Corina Habito for sharing this webinar with me, because those two systems are the most long-lasting collaborators for the Crop Ontology, and they have really contributed to the promotion of the work we have been doing. I know that from some breeders I've been talking to recently, they consider that Crop Ontology was a key tool for the harmonization of breeding database that was super lacking 10 years ago. So they are rather happy. We hope to, so this ontology should remain as also a long-term sustainable resource for those systems, and it's a matter of collaborating together. And I think you had a good example of how the crop ontology is used by breeding management system, and particularly for the field books. And during the coming webinars, we will follow the same pattern. We will introduce an ontology and the tools that are using this ontology at the moment. So thank you to my co-speakers for being there, and talk to you in 2 weeks now for the next webinar. Thank you.